So hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Today we have Lisa Anderson, who's the founder and president of LMA Consulting Group Incorporated, a consulting firm that specializes in manufacturing strategy and end-to-end supply chain transformation that maximizes the customer experience and enables profitable, scalable, dramatic business growth. Her expertise encompasses the full scope of end-to-end supply chain business processes from creation to customer. She is ranked number 16 in SAP Supply Chain Influencers and recognized as one of the top 1% of consultants worldwide. Lisa has deep experience partnering with manufacturers and distributors to maximize value. Lisa lives and works in Southern California, where she is actively involved with clients and in the business community. She is president of the Inland Empire chapter of APICS, the leading trade organization of supply chain management, one of the most active and innovative chapters in the United States. In addition, Lisa serves as Innovation Awards Chair of the Manufacturers Council of the Inland Empire and as leader of the Ontario chapter of Provisors, a community of trusted professional advisors. She is also a board member of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership and the University of La Verne School of Business and Public Management, and hosts quarterly executive roundtables with Harvey Mudd College. Lisa also serves as co-executive director of the Society for the Advancement of Consulting. Lisa recently published an ebook called Future-Proofing Manufacturing and Supply Chain Post-COVID-19, How to Successfully Navigate and Emerge from the Coronavirus Pandemic. And she will be speaking to us today about the supply chain and COVID-19. So thank you so much, Lisa, and now it's on to you.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here today with you, and I'd love to make it interactive. I'm going to bring up a presentation on supply chain and future-proofing manufacturing and supply chain thriving post-COVID-19. And let's see. Thinking about how to let folks in while I'm doing this. So Jolene, are you?
I'm here.
You may have to. I don't know if I can see the participants while I'm sharing the. Are you able to do that? Where you can let additional folks in as they come?
No, it's still leaving that with you as host.
You should be co-host. Well, let's see. Well, okay. I'll just check in on it every now and then and see what we can do here. So, okay. Let's see. Well, there we go. I think we'll just put that on my screen so I can see it. I'll just share it this way. So, okay. So I'm happy to make this interactive so that hopefully you can get your questions answered. I know that this group is largely tailored to logistics, trade, right, and those types of topics. So I'm happy to focus in more on whichever topics you'd like. So with that said, we'll go ahead. So clearly we've gone, early on in COVID, we had a supply chain misalignment, to be sure. All the wrong places were all the wrong items were in the wrong places at the wrong time, and certainly that was quite clear in the grocery stores. But, it was true throughout. There was hoarding of items, in the grocery stores, as we all know. But as far as I have clients spanning multiple industries, so I work with the industries that are typically in Southern California. And so those would be food and beverage, aerospace and defense, healthcare products, and like building and construction products, which are quite wide-ranging in terms of industries. And what we experienced is that the volume drop-offs and or spikes were dramatic. One day we had double the sales, and then it could be just a couple of days later where like half the volume disappeared. So it was extremely volatile across the board, and it really depended on who your customers are. So I'm going to talk more about that coming up. There was also complications with consumer versus industrial packaging. So for example, with toilet paper, there was plenty of capacity for toilet paper, but all of the commercial capacity, since no one was going to work, was was not needed, whereas the retail capacity was needed, and it wasn't as simple as just turning on one versus the other, because the packaging is extremely different between commercial and retail. Although some of the innovative stores eventually, figured that out quicker than the rest, and were able to address it. But that's why we have commercial looking packaging things in our stores still. And there were certainly resupply shocks from Asia as they started this crisis long before we did. And then, there's been waves of challenges since. So it's, it pretty much everything has gone into disarray. I think I'm going to talk about this more coming up, but e-commerce, and this might be of particular interest to this group, so we can go into more detail. But e-commerce is the only area across every client, and I also participate in multiple groups, groups of trusted advisors. I participate in CEO groups, as well as some CEO groups across the US. And I also participate in a global group of consultants that are from like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, etc. And the one thing that is up across the board is e-commerce. So not surprising, because pretty much everyone wants something delivered to their house, is really what that means. But it's had a significant disruption across the supply chain, because it is not the same from any aspect, and certainly not from a logistics aspect, which relates to this group. And so there's a dramatic shift that's going on across the board. And then let's see here, so one of the things that happened is what's called the Bullwhip Effect in the supply chain world, and I don't know how familiar everyone is, but really what that means is small changes in demand, which clearly were not the case in this case, but let's just pretend a small change in demand at the end customer. So, grocery is an easy one to tell because we are end customers, but a patient in a hospital, the last person in the line of whatever it is that whatever product it is that we're talking about. So a small change in the end customer, by the time, and this is just a very really, really simple supply chain we're showing here with a customer, distributor, manufacturer, and a supplier. It most likely there's many, many, many layers of distributors, manufacturers, suppliers, and other trade partners. But as you see the demand going out to the supplier, what that means is a small change in demand becomes a huge change in demand at the supplier. So if you can imagine huge changes in demand, which we've never experienced before, but we experienced with COVID, has really resulted in extreme variations when you look at the longer term supply chain. So that is extremely difficult to manage. And so that's one of the key challenges the people who are successful are finding ways to manage this better than the rest, although there's no magic wand. So really this is showing some immediate strategies, and we can, like I said, each of these, we could go into a lot of details, but a lot of the immediate strategy folks have done, but really whether they've done them thinking about the long term or not, I don't know. But they should be thinking about priorities and assessing risks. A lot of the risks that are coming up now were always existing, and best practices, if you will, were always addressed, and would have said that we had these issues in our supply chain. But you know how it goes. If you don't actually have a problem come up, then you think it's going to be fine, and you don't really worry about the risks that exist. But certainly we have discovered that having the extended supply chains, like to Asia as an example, can create extra challenges, because the 13-week delivery time, typically speaking, to get something from Asia doesn't allow for these sorts of rapid volatile changes. From a 3-month point of view, we really want to look at what factors will drive the business forward, and what do we start, stop, continue doing. And really what I say, it's not time to take a break. And I think I'll talk about this in a future slide, but objects in motion stay in motion, and objects at rest stay at rest. It's Newton's law is really quite true. I had that example happen when I finished my corporate career as a vice president of operations and supply chain, and I used to travel like crazy, and I started my consulting practice 15 years ago, and I hadn't traveled for like 6 months, I would say, until I traveled for my first client. And I was active, but I just wasn't traveling. And I have to say, the first trip I took, I was exhausted. I mean, it's like, what in the world was wrong with me? But it was because I wasn't on the go, as far as traveling goes. So this is true across the board here, is we have to keep things moving forward in a positive direction, or it's going to be 8 times as hard to get them moving again as things open up. So, and we'll talk more about the longer term strategies, which these days a long-term strategy is 9 months. But how do we redesign, redeploy, and rethink about this? All right, let's see. So generally speaking, our priorities right now are talent, customers and channels, leadership and culture. We'll talk about each of these in a little bit of detail anyway, because I want to make sure you have time for questions. And I'm gonna fly through the pieces that are surrounding the supply chain, because they're quite important to it, but I know this group is interested more on the supply chain side. So I'm gonna fly through these, but if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. So from a talent point of view, keep the best is not as easy as it sounds. We really have to be thinking about how we do that. And I want to emphasize this because I just got off the phone today with 2 clients that have lost 2 key people. And last week there was another client that lost a key person, and they were all supply chain related. And let me tell you, people are moving for better opportunities, and it is a real talk about like throwing a wrench into plans. This is like a major challenge here. So I would definitely say we need to be thinking about talent. It's very related to the supply chain. And we can also be, when sharpening the saw, basically take opportunities of downtime to how can we better utilize and get our folks up to speed on new concepts, that kind of thing. Customers and channels, this is very important to the supply chain. So the number one thing, and I'll be talking about this like a lot, but the number one thing that my most successful clients right now are looking at who are their customers and what are their changing needs, because everyone's needs are changing. Because as we go through and we try new things, because we're stuck at home and nothing else, we've all tried new things during this period of time, some of which might stick, or we might find is a more effective way to do something. So as our customers' needs are going to evolve, and our customers' needs are going to evolve, and we have to stay on top of that, or we will be left in the dust. So we have to really think about that, and what kind of channels are best, are the best ones to reach our customers. So the supply chain starts, in my book, with customers. So how do we keeping track of what's happening and staying on top of this is much more of a challenge than it used to be in the past. And so we need to think through this. It's very important. And then that leads you to product supply strategy. So as you probably can imagine, so it's a very popular topic. I was on Bloomberg News recently because I was found as a supply chain expert, and they were interested in reshoring. So that's where this everyone's talking about reshoring and nearshoring. Those are definitely being considered. So there are several statistics right now out there that basically the answer is most manufacturing executives are thinking about, where should I get my product from? And they're not thinking that they will just default to wherever they were getting it from before, which many might be like Asia as an example. That doesn't mean that they're going to move them all tomorrow morning by any means, but they are absolutely thinking about this. For high labor content products, it would be silly to move them back to the US, because after all, that would be extreme. We're not going to be competitive from a labor point of view. The thing is, most of the products that are sold have some kind of a value component to them. So if they do, then that's going to be you know, if you look at the total cost of products, it's much more in alignment, and people have not moved their supply chain from Asia mainly because there's so much invested, but now this has put them over the edge. So what I'm trying to say is that if there's a high labor component to the product, they probably are going to look at countries that are lower costs, like Vietnam, and it depends on what kind of products you have. But there's other countries in Southeast Asia, and of course, you know, China is still going to exist. And with that said, if there's not a high labor component to the product, they absolutely are looking at how can we produce closer to the customer demand. And since there's so much customer demand in the States, it's absolutely viable that manufacturing is going to move back for that reason, in addition to some of the reasons we've been hearing on the news, like the, you know, for PPE and those types of things. You want strategic supplies closer, but that's also another reason. One of my clients has their, you know, they are not going to save money by moving manufacturing to the US because they have more of a commodity product. But they are, for the first time ever, thinking about what they should do because they're more concerned about supporting their customers. And their customers, in their case, has pretty much doubled demand because they have a popular product for this period of time. So lawn and gardening kind of equipment, and they have an e-commerce component that's, you know, gone like, you know, crazy like everyone else. But they are thinking, how do I better support these changing customer conditions and the need for rapid deliveries, meaning like same day even. So they're thinking, how do I reconfigure? So everyone's gonna be thinking about, how do I reconfigure my sourcing arrangements, whether they are internal or external or a combination. And certainly Mexico is a very viable option because with, you know, with the USMCA agreement and the you know, it's going to be from a lower cost, a higher labor cost component products. You know, they also could easily be moving towards Mexico. And so it's going to be an interesting combination. It's going to dramatically change the landscape, which is also going to change the logistics landscape and the trade landscape, which I know you're all interested in. So this is going to be something to stay on top of what's happening and how to get in front of it, because it's you know, it's going to be widespread across the board. Something's going to be changing, or it's at least being evaluated. Financial strategies. So you need to, you also need to make sure you know what all of, like, what are we bringing in and when are we bringing it in, and how do we have, when do we have to pay for it? Will our customers continue to pay us? Will our suppliers stay in business? There's a lot of things to be thinking about when it comes to financial strategies that you didn't have to think about before COVID, because things are not carrying on like they always were before. From a leadership point of view, you know, I mentioned Newton's law of motion about keeping things moving. I think the bottom line here is people are on the move. If you're not on the move in terms of keeping your concepts moving forward and your business moving forward, your people will be on the move. You won't be, and it will be hard to start back up. So how do you engage them in looking at the future without, you know, mortgaging your future is really the question. So that's really what we got. It's, you know, trickier in a way than ever before. It's definitely a time for leadership to shine. These are some of the concepts we're going to have going forward that we have to really be thinking about. I think I have slides on them, so I think I'm going to keep going. But, you know, for example, well, no, it looks like I don't. So agility, if there's ever a time everyone's talking about a resilient supply chain, and I have a specialty process that I did like a year ago on the resilient supply chain, but it's become like very popular right now, because how do we change with the changing conditions is really what this is. Same type of thing. Is collaboration is no longer a fluffy topic, because what we need to do in today's environment is think about how do we partner with people we never partnered with before, and maybe even for just temporary quick changes. Like, for example, many manufacturers have partnered with folks they've never partnered with before to manufacture new products. that serve their customers or new customer bases, or do they, maybe they partner with competitors, but they're coming up with agreements that work for the short term as well as the long term. And that's really going to be a key going forward, which is important from a supply chain point of view. The more collaboration we have, the more technology and interrelationships we have to make sure we're dealing with. And of course, from a product point of view, as you collaborate, that it tends to move. Where it's moving is another question, but it tends to move somewhere, which relates to logistics. And then we are gonna come back to demand and supply, because that's the biggest challenge during these times, is how to realign demand and supply. I'm finding a program called Sales Inventory Operations Planning, or sometimes called Sales and Operations Planning, is absolutely critical in this environment, because how do you realign those two quickly so that you can get your business on track? And then we have innovation. By all means, the companies that innovate during these times are going to be much more successful than those that don't. And there's, I think, a story, I don't know, I guess I'll tell it to you now, but during the Great Depression, cold cereal was a newer thing, surprisingly so. But as everyone else did, they hunkered down during the Great Depression. Most companies did, and they cut off spending, and they just tried to do what they could to survive, which is understandable, similar to what a lot of people are doing now. And Kellogg's chose a different approach, and they decided, it was Kellogg's and Post, but Kellogg's decided, nope, I'm going to invest in the future, and I'm really going to promote my cereal, and their revenue increased dramatically by doing that. So it is the time to stand out in the crowd. It doesn't always require investment in money, but it does require innovating and thinking differently. And then speed. We all know in our industry that the Amazon effect is absolutely in place. So we have an expectation of immediate satisfaction from a delivery standpoint, a service standpoint, information standpoint, etc. So I have, you're welcome to a free download of my, the book that Jolene mentioned, Future-Proofing Manufacturing and Supply Chain. I have a link coming up later in the call. And so you'll get highlights by function. So that's the reason I'm stopping to tell you this, because I'm going to speed through several of these so that we can talk to some questions that you have. But I provide some HR and safety tips, sales and business development. Relationships are on the move is something that I should highlight here. So what I mean by that is, now is the time to shine. If you can stand out, it doesn't mean you have to be perfect in service, but if you can stand out when it comes to providing a superior customer experience and being of value to your customers, even doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but you have to be on top of it and being of value. More people are going to move to new, there's always the pain associated with moving. So it's like banking. So who wants to move to a new bank? No one. It's a pain. But in this time, several clients are moving bankers because they're annoyed with their current bankers. So it's the same thing. Customers are willing to move during these times, and they are going to move. So just keep that in mind. It's very important. So we have to stay involved and on top of our customers' evolving needs. Customer service stays with that. Like I said, should be differentiated. There's changing consumer behaviors and business buying behaviors we have to stay on top of. From a supplier standpoint, and since this one is more related, I'm going to spend more time on the ones that are more related to you. But are your suppliers reliable? But more importantly, do you even know and have a feel for who your suppliers are? Because if one of them goes out of business, which is very common, businesses in China are going out of business left and right, and the small guys are having to keep paying people even when they're not producing, and there's a lot of risk, according to some international contacts that are China experts that I have that I'm in touch with. So it's important to stay on top of who your suppliers are and how financially solvent they are and what's going to happen with all this. So but that you should be doing that regardless of where they're located. I'm just pointing out that right now there's a particular challenge, and it could be a particular challenge in China if you're dealing with some of the small and medium-sized folks. And then, you know, are you a customer of choice? Because this is going to turn around, and will they serve you or not? That's the question. Are you good to do business with? So it's things change rapidly in this environment, and that's true for transportation as well. So like I said, things are really things have been out of balance from the transportation network point of view. You know, like we have plenty of empties in all the wrong places. It's getting into alignment. It's getting more into alignment, I should say, or we're addressing it, certainly. With that said, though, there is a lot of challenges still, because we did receive a whole bunch of goods that are, I think they've moved to Arizona and in the desert and all sorts of other places because they weren't sold. You know, our spring and summer, you know, whichever seasons were in the warehouse in March, you know, no one was buying them for the most part, because pretty much the only thing was sold was essential supplies. So there's a definite complications when it comes to warehousing. Now manufacturers are realizing and distributors are realizing, I don't know if JIT is all I thought it should be, just in time. So meaning getting inventory just as you need it. Now, is JIT really a problem? No, it's like everything else. The way that you would implement any of these concepts, if you look at them like best practice wise, means that you have backups in place. It means you've assessed your risks and it's not the only thing you're doing. But that's not what a lot of people were doing. So now they are looking at, well, in some cases, they're overreacting, saying I need to order more of everything, but that's just creating more of that bullwhip effect. But in the smarter cases, they're saying, what strategic inventory do I need, at least short term? And then maybe I'll get some capacity closer to my customers, which would be even better than having the wrong inventory position there. Because what's the right inventory anyway, with changing customer expectations? Who's to say? So that's the question. That's why having capabilities closer to your customer is where the network's going to go, one way or another. So, and there's impacts of e-commerce. So diversification, for sure. People who had multiple avenues, well, first let's start with customers. Multiple types of customers. I have some clients that are in food and beverage, and they had some, like Starbucks was one client. That one was awful because the Starbucks stores closed. They weren't selling food bars, which is what my client produced, because people only bought that when they went inside. So that was like terrible. They also sold to doctors' offices. Terrible. No one went to the doctors unless they had coronavirus and they weren't eating food bars. So that's terrible. On the other hand, they were diversified and they sold to Costco's or their customers' customers sold to people like Costco and other folks. And so those did well. And e-commerce did well. So if you had a diversified customer base, it depends on your industry. Like in the case I'm describing, your business is still down overall, but it wasn't, you know, in this terrible, it didn't drop off by like 90%, which in hospitality, if that's who you served, it went to like 0, which was really horrible, obviously. So diversified, the same thing for your customers is true for your suppliers. It's true for your logistics network. So diversification has always been a topic, but again, we got a little too comfortable with things being just fine and moving along fine without any real disruptions and problems. And so we haven't always thought through our risks appropriately. And you can't like diversify across every function, but you have to think about 80-20. What is the key supplies you have, or what are the key transportation partners, or what are your key customers? So it's thinking about what's essential to your business in essence. From a manufacturing and supply chain operations, it's really like, so involving the front lines, meaning like the people delivering product. They know a lot about what's happening at customers, but are we asking them? So, I mean, it's things like that. There's people on the lines with customers who are angry. Are we asking them what's happening? Or are we just making assumptions? So, because the folks on the front lines know what's really happening. So, and that's not It's not a new concept. It's just become more important with the disruption. And of course, agility, how do you keep operational performance going when you have like rapid, dramatic swings in volume? It's not easy. And then people are robots. Well, certainly when you have the idea of how do you run 6 feet apart, right? So like we've all heard the stories about the chicken processing centers that were a fiasco because they had everybody and their brother had COVID basically, which is horrible, but they couldn't space themselves apart either. So, should you just go overboard and have all robots? Well, no. I mean, robots do not allow for flexibility, strangely enough. They do keep running and they don't have workers' comp claims, but they expect certain commands and they expect consistency. So again, it's like, what strategy makes sense for you? How do we combine concepts together? So it's not going to be all robots. It's not going to be all people. It's not going to be all in Asia or not in Asia. It's like what makes really sense is really the key here. As I mentioned, innovation is key. Really what I'd highlight here is everyone thinks innovation is a good idea until you have to encourage failure. And failure means that you're going to increase costs somewhere along the line. And it's always going to happen at month end because it's when else would it happen? It's going to happen when something's important. Your key customer has a problem. Something is going to happen that's bad. And so how do you react to that? If you react poorly, do you think anyone's ever going to innovate again? Never. So it's how do you set it up so that you have like a safe zone? So whatever bad effects happen, which are going to happen at the worst time possible, you have to react in a good way of a learning experience. But you also make it so that it's not going to like put you out of business by doing so. You have to, it's sort of like, children in a way, right? You want to have like some sort of a guideline or a safe zone so that you can innovate within, within a playing field, should I say. IT and technology so the idea here is there was a Brookings study in the Inland Empire, just a good example. And the Brookings Institute said the Inland Empire, the inland portion of Southern California it's number one in warehousing in the US. It's really number one in logistics in the US because pretty much everything comes in through the ports here and then goes through the Inland Empire through warehousing or to manufacturing. It's really significant in manufacturing too. It's just not as known for that because they're smaller manufacturers. It's not target manufacturing. And so the Brookings Institute did a study and said, you know what? You have to own who you are. You are really significant in logistics and advanced manufacturing. And if you do not get ahead of this, automation is coming and you are going to have a massive loss of jobs and a disaster pretty much in terms of your unemployment rates, etc. On the other hand, you could be wildly successful because you're not only number one in these industries, but you could become a number one thought leader in these industries and provide people with new skills and find ways to be like, you have the opportunity to become like the best or the worst. And so what are you going to choose? And so really it's there's a consortium that's going on that's a group that's in essence the Inland Empire Economic Partnership has been related to it, but it's academics, it's policy, government and policymakers, and industry. And how do we combine those together into one? And the reason I'm bringing this study up is it relates to you, but also what they expected to happen by 2025, or let's say 2035 in terms of automation and impact has been accelerated greatly. So now what was going to happen in 2035 is going to happen by 2025 as an example. So it means that we have to be just like accelerate our plans like no tomorrow in terms of how we're going to get in front of this topic from a technology point of view. And that's definitely related. I know the ports are, have significant technology projects going on as well, and they're coordinating with a lot of the large players on how do we see, it's visibility of what's on the water, what's coming. So there's a lot of technology we could talk about, but basically that's just an example of showing you that technology is noteworthy and it's something we should be considering in our plans. AI, artificial intelligence, IoT, robotics, all of this, blockchain, very important to logistics. And it's definitely a future concept that's being sped up, if you will. So finance and accounting, like I said, really you have to make sure you're on top of where your cash is the key. I talked about demand and supply, but it's worth repeating that it's an unprecedented issue, that demand is as variable as it is and supply is as variable as it is. So nothing is stable. And so it's really important to get on top of demand planning, demand forecasting, understanding customer demand. I'm seeing a significant interest from clients, but I'm also seeing the most results from clients who are working to get on top of that customer demand and even create the demand, because they're thinking about what do customers need in the future, what products should I be producing, what services should I be offering to deal with the future, and how do I better align my supply chain, not just with where do I produce, but how do I keep suppliers in the loop of what's happening in the future? How do I most efficiently produce within internal and external production capabilities? How do I, should I have warehouses or should I use a 3PL? What do I do? How do I align my demand with my supply? That's what I'm finding is the #1 topic today for the most successful companies in supply chain. And that's what this is, aligning demand and supply. How does SIOP is sales, inventory, operations planning? It's basically this complicated diagram means it fits in the middle. It's like, how do you align your demand with all of these supply components, which include all the things on the right. So from your sales plan, manufacturing, purchasing, logistics, inventory investment, capital investment. It's pretty much what you need to run your company. And it used to be a lot easier when you understood your demand. Now, there are no customers out there that truly understand what's happening with demand, and you have to have a different, separate, focused process to make sure that you align this as best as possible, because it really is going to mean that you are, it's going to help you improve your revenue, service, cash flow, and margins, which what else could we want? And I mentioned the proactive management of demand, really quite critical. Looking at some forecasting systems. So like some Gartner research here that for every 1% improvement in forecast accuracy, and 1% does not seem significant, is a 7% reduction in finished goods inventories, which is, it's just a stat. It doesn't mean it's true across the board, but it's dramatic. That's a dramatic amount of cash that you can free up. What will you do with that? You know, what could you do with that cash, and or what maybe it'll keep you in business. And AMR research says that 3% increase in forecast accuracy is a 2% increase in margins. Think about that, that's extreme. So that's why there's such an interest in this topic. And it's a lot of what my firm is focusing on right now. And proactive management of supply, like I said, once you get demand under control, you want to parallel path the two, but clearly you have to have demand in the equation, or it doesn't matter what supply is doing. But you want to get your supply, and I talked about this, but your suppliers, frontline resources, transportation networks, you know, all of the partners that we are involved with on this call. Inventory is also another key thing, because what else would we be transporting and moving around other than inventory? And inventory is quite critical because we have such issues right now with cash flow. Because of all the impacts of COVID, we're concerned about inventory. At the same time, some folks are trying to bring on more inventory because they realize that they need to supply customers. So it's it's really it's art and science. How do you keep the right amount of inventory in the right place at the right time? And SIOP, it covers, it aligns all the functions. So I usually tell people, I have a hour-long presentation on just SIOP, so I'm not going to obviously do that. But the interesting thing is that I've implemented it with multiple clients, and they've had dramatic results. But the key here is that as much as it's important to get the technical pieces aligned, so like you understand what your forecast is and you have hard numbers, aligning the people and the functions is harder and more important. Once you get the people aligned, somehow the numbers fall into place. Happens every time. It's kind of interesting. I mean, it doesn't mean you can be crazy with your numbers, but you know, if you had to pick priorities. And this one, you reduce your risk. If I have to keep my participants slide open so I can let people in, because I've let a few in since we started here. But if I was on presentation mode, you would see that the risk is reduced and predictability and flexibility is increased, which is, you know, of course, what we all want. And so you go up this pyramid. So meaning like you don't look at everything in like the item level detail, but you're going up to look at it at a higher level detail, because there's just no way to look at it at the lower one. And who doesn't want to decrease their risk and increase their predictability? So that's really a key. And it's a monthly rolling process. So you tend to look out 12 to 18 months of forecast and supply, and you do it on a rolling basis. Are you perfect every month? Never. But you look at the key items and you have the opportunity each month to update it. And it's interesting, after you get this going, suddenly everything starts to come into play. Here's the results I talked about. So generally speaking, this is a study by the Hackett Group, but it's what I found with clients. And that's the 2 to 4% sales growth. It's usually based on service and partners, partner type relationships. 5 to 10% cost reduction is quite significant. And 20 to 30% inventory reduction is quite significant, obviously. And I've seen up to 50%. It just depends. Where are you starting? What's their network look like? All those kinds of questions. So going forward, these are the most of the trends that I've talked about before, but innovation, collaboration, rapid, I talked about all of those. Throwing out best practices, and what I mean by that is what's really of immediate value for your company and your situation, and what's going to be, you know, best practices pre-COVID. Don't even worry about it. It doesn't matter. What is it that's going to provide immediate value and value to your customers? That's what we should focus in on. And then remote, well, we've all gone remote. We're doing this remote, right? So what can we do to make it to maximize our effectiveness and take advantage of the remote capabilities in all of our organizations? With that said, you know, post-COVID, perhaps we can thrive more in a smart hybrid approach, which could be different based on the company. But I just got off a call with with a group of CEOs before this call, and we were talking just about this topic. As much as everyone has Zoom fatigue, you know, it's the remote workplace is partially here to stay. And so we need to think about how do we thrive and which parts should we not do remotely, you know, post-COVID, and what should we do? I mentioned changing customer needs. I mentioned immediate strategy. One thing that's good for all of us in this call is the attractiveness of our critical industries. Logistics, manufacturing are much more attractive, respected, I guess you could say, but we're producing critical things like PPE. So I think we've gained some nice exposure anyhow. We're moving more towards a local or a regional type manufacturing feel, and digitization is definitely a key piece for the future. So as we're restarting here, which is going to really be over the next year, well, hopefully not, but at least 6 months to a year, and we're never getting back to the old normal. So whatever the new environment will look like, but I would just recommend we keep Newton's law in place, you know, like remembering that some step forward, you don't have to spend a lot of money, but keep things moving forward. You can't coast uphill. So that's like a great way to think about this, but unfortunately, I would like to coast many times too, but you just are going downhill. And then relationships are moving faster. So again, you know, can't be going downhill and your relationships are going in the other direction. Manufacturing, the extended supply chains moving faster. Applied creativity or innovation. And when I say taking control of turning the dial, we don't just turn things on and off within a second here. Although that's what our customers would like many times. So how do we like work with our extended supply chain and going in both directions, depending upon your role in the supply chain, and do it in a coordinated fashion so it can be successful. I mentioned the book, and I think the last slide is just contact information. So I'll go there, but then I'll come back to this. So this is, feel free to send me notes after this meeting, but I'd like to answer a few questions now. Jolene, if you want, since I know that you had trouble with getting folks to the call, since I recorded it, I'll be happy to post it for you and you can share it with the folks who weren't able to be here. But I'll go back to the other ones so you can, feel free to download it. It's a free free ebook. So go ahead. Does anyone have any questions? Let's see here. I think I can see questions, or you can just turn off your mics, I'm guessing. So not yet, huh? Folks are thinking. Do you have any questions, Jolie?
I mean, one thing I was just curious about is going forward. I mean, you mentioned automation. You know, we have a fair bit of it already. So I was just thinking if you know, we're going to get more of that versus just staying the same because of this. Because even working remote, I don't know, I mean, I could be wrong, but it seems to me like some of the industry might be looking at a way to even reduce physical footprints because people have successfully been able to work you know, from home versus the traditional office. So there's a way to kind of make their footprint a bit smaller and cut a bit of overhead as well. Yeah. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, you're absolutely right. That is part of what's being debated. And certainly in commercial real estate circles, it's a little bit of, it's tricky because what I'm seeing evolve, and that was actually what, like I said, we just had a discussion about this with a group of CEOs. So I guess you could say hot off the press, but is that what I'm finding, certainly if you're a manufacturer, you know, the non-office people are going to have to come in. That, you know, that's obvious. But the from an office folks and from a skilled, you know, like skilled functions that don't have to be on site to do their role, what I'm seeing is that most companies are thinking, and most executives are thinking, they would like to have some interaction on some sort of a, you know, like, I don't know, maybe folks come in 2 days a week or key meetings where they come in, but they're also seeing that they can be even more effective in many cases remotely because they're with the use of technology, because they're using things like Microsoft Teams or whatever to, you know, answer questions immediately. And they can't, like, for example, for what I do, I'm looking into people, processes, and systems to help manufacturers and distributors get to another level. And I've done an assessment with a client in Kansas City, and I, in this phase of the project, I haven't seen them because it started in the beginning of COVID. But we found out we were even more successful in doing it remotely because we're sharing screens and looking at what they're doing and how they do it, and we're recording the sessions. So I can go back once I figured out, interesting, like I see the whole equation and I'm like, okay, I want to dive deeper into this aspect because there's an opportunity there. And when I first did the interviews, I didn't know I was going to have this idea of where to go. So I wasn't listening for the same thing. So I would go back and listen to the interviews in key places to hear what was said about what I've now discovered is an opportunity for them. And it just saves a lot of time and effort. And then I can just ask follow-up questions. So there's some advantages to it. But I'm seeing most clients are finding that people can now, if kids aren't in school, that can create a disruption for people with the smaller children. That's certainly a problem. But aside from that, they're finding that the remote work has several advantages, and so they're thinking about a hybrid approach where you use the best of both, is what I'm hearing.
Okay. So Laura had a question. She wanted to know if you could elaborate on your comment regarding throwing out best practices in exchange for immediate value.
Sure. So what I mean is that it's sort of one of the other topics that I tend to do quite a bit with is I help clients select the ERP system, which is the system where you ship, receive, invoice, that kind of thing, for their business. It's one of the technology things, and there's peripheral pieces to it. So the warehousing, transportation, forecasting. And a lot of those suppliers say things like, just follow the system because the best practices are incorporated. Now, it doesn't have to be related to the system, but it's just the first thing that came to mind with this question, is that the best practice is, generally speaking, cross-industry, and it's generic. So in this environment, it's extremely specific to who your customers are, who your suppliers are, what does your manufacturing operations look like, and what's the best way to really optimize inventory in your situation. So following some best practice that's generic is very unlikely to achieve the results that you want to improve your process. So instead, immediate value means let's look at our current situation, do a quick assessment. I don't mean like spend months on anything. We don't have time for that sort of thing, but a rapid assessment of the current situation. So current customers, current suppliers, current operations, current systems, and what functionality do we have or not have, and current capabilities, let's say. And then let's say, now what's our best practice? And actually, I'm more of an advocate of doing this generally speaking, but it's not as vital because the best practices might work 80% of the time, if you will. But now, no, they're going to work 20% of the time. So instead, we have to figure out what our current situation is, what's going to provide immediate value, and will that even be in place a month from now? Probably not, because the situation is continuing to evolve. So in a way, you have to reevaluate, reassess, and realign your best practices, if you will, on a more frequent schedule. It just depends on your industry as to how frequent. But that's what I mean by providing immediate value. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. That does answer my question.
Great. So Jolene, I have to run to another call, but I'm happy to answer any additional questions. If folks have them, feel free to email me or give me a call.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.